Can't believe it's November already. Full body meeting of the Employee Forum. We have several special presentations today, which we're going to kick off pretty much right away. The first of which is Professor Michael Gerhardt here from the School of Law, the Burton Craig Distinguished Professor of Jurisprudence. He is here to speak to us about free speech, and in particular, kind of some guidelines for staff on campus related to the free speech conversation. So Professor Gerhardt, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us. Professor Gerhardt recently spoke with the Faculty Council, and I heard his remarks, and I wanted to make sure staff had some similar information to work with in our roles here at the university. So we really appreciate you coming to speak with us today. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate, it's always, I suppose, a good thing to know that somebody invites me to do something after hearing me speak. I usually hear, calls for termination and things like that. But I appreciate everybody getting together, and I want to make the best use of everyone's time by launching into a relatively brief description of the First Amendment law that applies generally on the campus, but particularly as it may relate to staff. And then take questions if you have any. So there are a couple basic things to keep in mind when we talk about the First Amendment on a college or university campus. The first thing is, and this is true for private and public universities, but perhaps especially public universities, and that is that the university effectively controls the kinds of speech that may be expressed officially on the campus, whether it's in the classroom or whether it is in other formal operations or meetings on campus. So the university can put various conditions on that. So it would not be illegal, for example, if the university were to say to somebody in, let's say, the public health school, we don't want you talking publicly about abortion. That could still be subject to some kind of attack, which I'll talk about in a minute, but there can be conditions like that. What the university cannot do is tell people what to think and say in their private lives or private capacity. So it's a long way of saying that as long as you're careful about the context in which you are speaking, making clear, for example, if you're just speaking for yourself privately, then I think the First Amendment protects you. But things to watch out for are things like whether you're speaking at the time of day when you're supposed to be working for the university, whether you're expressing yourself while wearing a UNC uniform or insignia. The university can be can restrict a fair bit of expression when people are on university time, their professional time, or when they, let's say, wear a UNC uniform, or when they are speaking on campus in a classroom or somewhere else where they're supposed to be speaking, because that's their job. What the university is not going to be able to do is once you sort of clock out, then you have the same freedom of speech protections that every other citizen in this country has. And the only thing then you have to just be aware of in exercising that freedom is to make sure there's no confusion about for whom you were talking. And as long as that's made clear, then I think there's a broad range of speech and expression people can engage in. Partly because I'm a law professor and partly because it's early and partly because I'm just going to be difficult. I will raise one of the toughest probably questions, and that has to do with protesting, the official activity of the campus. I think by and large, the First Amendment would probably protect the university in limiting the size of protests, in limiting the locations of protests, in limiting signage, or any number of things, as long as the university's actions are what we'll call even-handed. But if the university, for example, makes it easier for, let's say, Democrats to say something as opposed to Republicans, that's a problem. And we can encounter that. But a protest raises questions about, that go to the heart of the First Amendment, because to begin with, generally speaking, everybody would have a right to protest governmental action. And keep in mind, we're a state university, so everything that happens here is really governmental action.
Good morning, Elderly Services. Aline speaking.
And so it's okay. And so if there is a protest, then we get into an awkward position where you might, on your time off, want to protest, but then you'd have to still be subject to whatever conditions the university has placed on the kinds of protests that occur on campus. We experienced some of these issues not too long ago with Silent Sam. If people were, students could protest, faculty, staff, you could protest on either side of that question, so to speak. But the university could require things like, well, you had to be so many feet from the space, or it couldn't be during class time, or various things. And I think just generally, if people are engaged in that protest, but not on the university's time, and not showing that they are sort of officially part of the university, they're on stronger First Amendment grounds. This does get tricky, and government tries to place conditions on expression on its property all the time, and it just will require some vigilance to be aware of what those limitations or conditions are before you even engage in expression. That's a basic sort of framework, but I'm happy to answer questions and go into greater detail or less, depending upon what would be most useful.
Thank you so much, Professor Gerhardt. I'm going to open up the floor for questions. I guess I'll get us started with a kind of question around how best to decide between that line between officially and unofficially, besides the kind of parameters you set out. When we're talking about our role at the university, those lines get a little blurry in terms of speaking about our experience as a staff person on campus. So is there a line there that the university would say is we're speaking on behalf of the university versus speaking about our role at the university? That's a tough question. I understand, but I don't know if you have any perspective on that.
Well, I think if you're talking about either the university or your role at the university could probably place some conditions on that. And those are not unique to staff. I mean, they can be placed on faculty, even people visiting the campus for one reason or another. University can place various conditions on the expression that could take place. But let's say somebody's doing a documentary on the history of UNC. And we know, the UNC's had both a sort of very proud sort of background, but it's also had a background that's unfortunately linked, as is true for so many universities, with some really reprehensible things in our past, most obviously slavery, but also Jim Crow. There are things, therefore, that could be covered in that documentary that you could imagine perhaps, I'm just weaving a hypothetical, you could imagine perhaps administrators would not be happy to know that people working at the university in one way or another are speaking as part of that documentary. I think my suggestion would be that you're free to engage in that expression, but you should absolutely make clear the timing under which you're speaking. Unless you're working in the evenings, let's say, after 6, and you're emphasizing, I'm speaking for myself here. I'm not speaking for anyone else, certainly not speaking for the university. By making such disclaimers, you make it harder for the university to get at you. And then I'll finally just kind of try to answer that question in a very practical way. It is in the university's interest to narrow the opportunities in which you would be free to speak. In other words, the university will try and make it as hard as possible. It's obviously in the interest of faculty staff to try and expand the opportunities or freedom. And that's the dynamic we're going to have. What this requires, among other things, is a firm stance by university administrators in support of the First Amendment rights of its faculty and students and staff. And that's something perhaps to work on and to get the university leadership on your side. Without the university leadership on your side, there are all sorts of practical and other problems. But one thing one would hope that a university leadership in the year 2022 would stand for is freedom of expression, especially about issues and topics that are important for public discussion. With elections coming up, not just this year, but in the near future, there'll be heated passions that arise. University may then try to clamp down on how those passions may sort of manifest themselves on campus. If the university is trying to limit time, place, or manner, just the time of day, how you do it, and where you may do it. If the university is doing that, that's going to be okay. That'll be constitutional. You'd have to comply with that. But again, one thing to watch for is that the university creates what we'll call sort of unequal circumstances in which one side of a question gets to express itself, but another side does not. That's much more problematic and probably more likely to be realistic. Anyway.
That's helpful. Thank you. James, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I've got a question. Last week, the housekeepers went up and protested at the South Building, and it was on Channel 5 News. First, I'm asking, was that an illegal protest? And second, what would be the repercussions against the employee that was out there protesting if it's not legal?
Okay, well, the first thing is, and this is just my suggestion, is if you are planning a protest or conducting a protest, try and get permission beforehand. I should know this, but I don't, but I suspect on campus you need a license or some kind of official permission to engage in a protest. So you'd want to secure that first and not get not have to trip over the requirements for that are put on protests on campus. The second thing is that assuming that protest has been licensed and it's taking place in the area and in the manner that the university regulations might require, the stuff to be concerned about is don't wear your UNC stuff. And don't do it at a time when you're supposed to be working. And third, certainly don't do it in a way that will disrupt the activity of the campus. I'm just giving a hypothetical. If a group, and this has happened with students, storm a university administration building and sit in the president's office, that's something that it's going to be hard for the First Amendment to protect, because that kind of protest interferes with the orderly business of the campus. So whatever the protest may be, keep in mind that should be done in your off time without any UNC sort of paraphernalia, and also in a manner that doesn't interfere with the business of whatever it is you're protesting.
Okay.
Can I just comment on that particular one since James asked?
Sure. Provost Clemens.
Hey, sorry. So I don't know everything, but we knew it was occurring, which generally means it had been approved in advance, and we were told that it was coming. And I went out and actually listened for a while. And there's a lot of sympathy in the building for the requests of those housekeepers. And I know Becci Menghini is working really hard to figure out how to help them. So I can't comment that I know everything was done correctly, but it looked to me like it was, and it was certainly a peaceful protest and fully appropriate.
It's good to hear. Thank you for that. We've got a few questions in the chat. Are students who protest considered to be on university time? My suspicion is that because they're not employees, it would be a little bit different, correct?
Yes, and probably even a little more complicated. It would be hard, as noted, as a practical matter, for students to say, well, I want to disassociate myself from being a student, because if you're a full-time student, by definition, you are a full-time student. So I think in that circumstance, it's going to be important to, I would say it's important for the university to have reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, and for students to follow those. There are various difficulties that could arise. Again, I'm not saying this is true for the university, but I'm just sort of trying to alert everybody. A reasonable time, place, and manner regulation or restriction, which again, universities are completely authorized to implement, cannot be and I'll use a technical term but explain it, cannot be viewpoint based. So they have to be neutral with respect to messages and content. If, however, the regulations are designed to favor one viewpoint on an issue, that becomes problematic.
Another question in the chat: what if relevant and legitimate discussions in classes, i.e. law, women's studies, medicine, re-abortion, overlap with what could be considered protest content?
Well, it's a great question. And so here's my short answer. Everything, it's probably true for everything in life, but it's also especially true for the First Amendment, and that is context matters. Where you do it, how you do it, what you say, are all interrelated. And in a classrooms exist for certain purposes, the most obvious of which is to teach. And so for the most part, university professors, and of course the provost and others, they're the so-called experts on what But there is a line, and it's not easily identified between, let's say, teaching and I'm trying to think of the right word. Indoctrinating or pushing your personal agenda in a classroom, which is not the right place to do that in. So I'm going to presume, and I think I'm on pretty solid ground here, as a professor who's supposed to be teaching constitutional law, the topic of abortion will come up. Because I teach courses on the 14th Amendment, and abortion is a topic that comes up under the 14th Amendment and has. There are going to be ways to teach that. What are the different viewpoints? What did the law look like? What does it look like now? Things like that. That's all. I think all that falls quite squarely within sort of the teaching circumstance. Now to just take an easy case. But if I were to stand up in class and say, okay, everybody, we vote next Tuesday, everybody should be voting for X or Y, because of their stances on this issue of abortion, that's not teaching.
And that would be illegal in North Carolina.
Right.
I think,
Right. Yeah.
It's if it's on a ballot, right?
Right. And it would be, a university would be perfectly legitimate, or for that matter, the state, in just not allowing that kind of expression. The tough thing is what everybody here knows, and that is where's the line? And I think the line is generally drawn in a couple different ways. And this is what to watch for. I mean, one way the line could be drawn is just as kind of a straight line, just a flat, clear line. Don't go over this line and stay on that side of the line. The question then is going to be, how reasonable is the line? The other way the line gets drawn is through a balancing of different factors. Things like, okay, time of day, classroom, various things you'd want to take note of. And on balance, you would make a decision, okay, this is what I'm doing falls on this side of the pedagogical line and not that side of the line, which is pure political expression that is really not licensed by my position. And so just the important thing is, I used to tell this to my kids. They're all grown now, although I still do tell it to them. They were great Batman fans growing up, and one of the lessons of one of the early Batman movies is be aware of your surroundings. And that's probably a good rule of thumb for life. Just be aware of the context, be aware of where you are when you're doing what you're doing.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question. And Rebecca has one in the chat. What responsibility does the university or departments have in terms of properly explaining the requirements without appearing to be intimidating? In other words, do administrators have a responsibility to explain things in an even-handed, clear, and understandable, i.e. non-legalese, non-threatening way? Can they require employees to sign or acknowledge only specific policies and not others? That may be a broader question than you can answer.
Well, there's a lot there. I mean, here I'm going to largely defer to the provost, but I guess as a preliminary matter, I would say that it's always good, of course, for a university to make its policies, regulations, all the rest clear. We can run into a little bit of a First Amendment problem when governmental action, I hate to use this legalese, falls into two different problems. One is if it's vague. If the policy is vague, nobody knows what to do. So the negative result of that is you might refrain from doing things that are protected but you're fearful that they might be covered by the regulation. The other thing is what we watch for is what's called overbreath. That's if something just is too broad. And generally speaking, courts will assess the constitutionality of different regulations in various ways, including asking, is it clear? And really the point of clarity is to provide notice. Or does it go too far? And the answers depend entirely on context. But I'd otherwise defer to the provost.
Provost Clemens, any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with Michael that there is a lot in that question, and I'm not an expert on all of it. So let me just comment on one or two items. First, I think we do have a responsibility to try to be clear. There are a lot of policies in the university, and I'm actually going to say something about Leah's work here. She had started a policy review, which was an attempt to find policies that are written in language that might be because we do have legalese in our policies. We can rewrite those. It's a massive undertaking. So she has done the study to identify the policies that need work. So we are trying to fulfill that responsibility. It is no good to have a policy that you can't read and understand. So I think clarity is something that we could do better at. And we are certainly, Leah has spent, I will tell you, with her team, quite a lot of time moving us in that direction. In terms of the acknowledgement for policies, we have policies which we do track, right? There are HR trainings that you have to take, and you'll get an email if you don't fulfill it and complete all the requirements, and it'll bug you to say, you have this training that you're supposed to take. Obviously, to do that for lots and lots of policies would make your life very difficult. So I think we're quite judicious. Normally, it comes up if it's a federal requirement for us to say that the policy was one all the or a state requirement, or if something is happening that requires a kind of reiteration of policy, we may put a policy out and emphasize its importance. I'm not aware that other than for reasons of compliance, we require people to acknowledge they've seen a policy. That might happen to individuals who have been in a situation where they were thought to have violated it. But correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not aware of places where we put policy.
I think there was a specific circumstance surrounding that FNO memo that went out where a department was printing out and requesting that their employees sign and acknowledge that they received the policy. And if they did not, they were called into meetings with their supervisors, which to me speaks to some of the even-handedness that Professor Gerhardt was talking about. So I think was some concerns there around requiring folks to do that for this particular policy and maybe not for every single policy that exists and that they're supposed to adhere to.
Well, and you can see how that would happen if there's a policy that people feel like people need reminding of. You could go that way. I don't know the case in question. Katie, I would be happy to talk more about that specific case and have a conversation about whether it might have been not as even-handed as we would like. I think the goal is to do our responsibility well. There are a lot of faculty, a lot of administrators. So if someone is, if you have concerns, I'd be happy to discuss them.
Great. Well, I think that puts us at time, but I want to thank Professor Gerhardt again for coming out and speaking with us. This has been definitely very enlightening and has given some kind of great pointers that we may need to kind of maybe write up and put out there for staff to have at their disposal. Because without this information, I think people are at a disadvantage when it comes to feeling like they know where they stand with the university. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming. And we'll turn to our next presenter, which Chris kind of teed up pretty nicely. Leah Cox is here from the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Thank you, Leah, for being with us today. And you're going to talk to us a little bit about the campus climate survey that's out right now.
Thank you, Katie. Can I share my screen?
You may.
Quick. Thank you. Telling me, did you give me access yet? Okay, there we go. Thank you. Let's see if I can find the right screen here. Got way too much stuff open at one time. Let's see. It's not letting me get to what I want to get to. Let's see if I can pull it up here. And it's not opening it up for me. Let me try this again. There we go. Screen 2.
Excellent.
All right. Hopefully you can see that.
Perfect.
All right. So thank you again for inviting me. And I'm going to make this quick and not too painful for all of you, but hopefully you have received in your email boxes a request for you to fill out a campus climate survey. And so from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we are running an entire campus climate survey. There's not been one done since 2016. So that's quite a long time for us to take sort of a look at the campus, where we are in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so as you can see, these are all integral parts of where we want to get to make sure that we're building the community that we want on the UNC campus. And so what you'll see are requests that come through your email, and please check your spam because sometimes it will go to spam and it will ask you for a campus climate survey. And we want to know about your Carolina experience. We want to know how you're feeling about the things that are happening to you on campus. Are you feeling welcomed? Are you feeling a sense of belonging? Are you feeling that you've been ignored? Any of those things. We want to hear the good, the bad, because that's the only way that we can start making sure that we are addressing some of the issues on campus. UNC is a large campus, and there's no way that I will get to talk to each and every staff, faculty, student, employee, administrator on this campus. So this is one way for us to kind of take the temperature of the campus and then give feedback. And yes, we will share the report once we have collected all of the surveys, analyzed all of the data in the spring. We will come back, or I will come back, and share the report with you about what we've learned about our campus. The email will come from Viewfinder. Okay, so that is the instrument that we're using. It's from our consultant Viewfinder. It will say Campus Climate Survey. Just so you know, there are incentives for staff. So there are monetary and UNC apparel incentives for those, and we will choose those. There will be a click on button at the very end of the survey saying, would you like to be considered for incentives? And so please let us know if you are, and then we will make sure that you are in the pool. I'm asking all of you because you have contact with the folks in your unit, folks outside your unit, anybody you know. So it doesn't help our campus if we only get 300 employees who respond. There are a lot of folks on this campus, and if we can get over half, then it helps me to do the job that I've been asked to do here at UNC. So I'm going to stop sharing and answer any questions that you may possibly have.
Any questions for Leah? Who else completed the survey so far? Raise your hands. Whoop, whoop. Keith, your question.
Yes, good morning. I guess I have a couple of questions. When is the deadline for having this survey filled out? And will a reminder email be going out? I don't recall getting the first one, but I get a whole lot of things from people I don't know. And I'm like, why are you emailing me? But so
The deadline's today. No, just kidding, Keith. It's not today.
I was like, maybe it ain't gonna happen.
And let me just say, the survey is quick. It should take you no more than 15 minutes. The deadline is November 18th. I would suggest we not wait till November 18th. There's a weekly reminder for those who haven't taken it weekly. So it comes out weekly. The Chancellor, myself, and the Provost sent out a large campus email about 2 weeks ago when this opened up, but we will continue to remind folks. And so that's why I'm coming to you today. Make sure you do your survey. Did I answer all the questions, Keith? And I can't remember.
Yes, ma'am, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Linda, your hand's up.
Oh, sorry, that was just me saying I did the survey. When you said raise
Oh.
your hand.
Excellent. That's
Yay,
great to
me!
hear. We will definitely encourage our units to participate in the survey, Leah, and we appreciate you coming out and sharing with us today.
Thank
for
you.
being here.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
You too. All right, turning to our next presentation, we've got a presentation about the lead testing happening across campus right now, and we've got a couple of folks here to speak with us on that. So we've got George Battle, Vice Chancellor for Institutional Integrity and Risk Management. Hi, George, good to see you.
Hi.
And we've
morning.
also got Rebecca Fry, Carol Remmer Engel, Endowed Professor in Environmental Sciences and Engineering. That's a mouthful of a department. Hello, Rebecca. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, I'll turn it over to y'all. Thank you so much for talking with us about the lead testing happening on campus.
All right, thank you, Katie, and I will kick off and thank you all for the opportunity to come before you today and talk a little bit about where we are and hopefully answer some questions. May I share my screen?
You may.
Okay. All right. Can everybody see? Okay, great. So before we get into questions, I just want to present, a few slides about kind of where we are, where we've gone, some of the resources available as we test the water in the buildings on campus. And then after I present these, I'll turn to my friend Dr. Fry, and she will present from her perspective some of the effects of lead and some of the health implications there. So let me start, and a lot of this information you already know, so I won't belabor it, but I do want to touch on it. So to start, most of the common sources of lead in drinking water are from pipes, faucets, and fixtures. Lead can enter our drinking water in various ways, over time, especially when these when the materials in these fixtures and these pipes starts to corrode. OWASA, which is you'll hear us refer to OWASA, over the course of our talk this morning, and that is the Orange County Water and Sewer Authority, which is our water provider for the university as well as other entities in Orange County. OWASA adds corrosion inhibitors to our municipal water to help guard against. It's not an absolute shield, but to help guard against lead coming into the drinking water. And the OWASA survey has shown that they don't have lead in their service pipes. So the lead issues that we have on campus are contained to campus and are not functions of OWASA. The EPA lead action levels. You may have heard these thrown around and seen these in the different news stories. The Environmental Protection Agency requires water systems, and OWASA is a water system. Carolina is not a water system, but the EPA requires water systems to take action on lead when measurements in samples of the water taken measure more than 15 parts per billion. EHS, Environmental Health and Safety, we've been using this 15 parts per billion action level as a reference. But again, that is not a rule that applies to us, but we've been using that as a reference in terms of our testing. Now, even when we find lead levels, though, that are less than that 15 parts per billion, we are taking actions and we are replacing those fixtures or repairing them. If we find, like we did in Spencer, that there are multiple fixtures in a particular building or it seems to be a pattern of lead, we are taking other actions as well, looking at the piping and that kind of thing. All right. And we've taken a phased approach to water testing. As you know, in August, we were alerted to the potential issue in Wilson Library, and that's kind of led us to where we are today. We have done this in phase, the first two of which are complete. Phase one, we tested drinking water fixtures that potentially contained lead components based on the building's age or construction factors. Phase two, which we just completed last week, and that we tested drinking water fixtures in buildings that were built in or prior to 1930. And we are now in phase three, where we are testing drinking water fixtures in buildings that were built in or prior to 1990. During the testing, and some of you may be in buildings where you've had this already, you know, when we take the drinking fountains offline, there will be a water cooler or coolers put in those buildings as alternate water sources. And in those buildings where we are actually in the mode where we're replacing those fixtures, water coolers are provided in those buildings where the out of service drinking fountains are the only accessible drinking fixtures. So we are trying to make sure, or we're going to make sure that everybody on campus has access to safe drinking water while their building is being tested. And then in the event that we have to take some action with repairing or replacing those fixtures, we're going to make sure that you have safe drinking water there. As far as blood testing, for lead level testings in your blood, the university, of course, is making health testing for lead available to all faculty, staff, and students who work, study, or live in an affected building. Certainly, to initiate that testing, the numbers are on the slide, but they're also on the EHS website as well. So that testing is available for you, and that testing is being provided, of course, for employees free of charge, but also for students free of charge as well. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Dr. Fry so that she can present a few slides on the health effects of lead.
Great. Thanks, George. Rebecca.
Thank you.
Great. Are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
You are? Okay, great. Nice to see you all. Thank you for the invitation. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what we know about health effects of lead exposure. Just in terms of my background, I'm in the Gilling School of Global Public Health and the Department of Environmental Sciences and Engineering, and I wear several hats there. I run our Superfund research program, the Institute for Environmental Health Solutions, and am part of the leadership of the Center for Environmental Health and Susceptibility. And I have spent my career researching health effects of exposures to toxic metals and biological mechanisms by which that's associated with disease and solutions for preventing this. And I was called in shortly after the school identified lead to serve as a scientific advisor. I've also been assisting with student volunteer recruitment. We have some students who are helping to collect water samples. Unfortunately, metals are really everywhere in the environment. We are not alone in having to deal with this issue. It's important to remember, though, that there are differences in the harms of lead exposure if that exposure happens in children or adults. It's also important to remember that health effects depend on many factors: the age of the individual, the concentration of the toxic metal, the duration of the exposure. So I really call this the fact that risk is individualized. We know that the developing fetus and young children are most vulnerable. And we also know that generally health effects of lead in adults have been associated with chronic exposure through their work. So meaning mining or welding. But in spite of that, we also know from the toxicology standpoint that there's no safe level of lead. And so we are acting aggressively and using an abundance of caution, providing clean drinking water where any lead is identified. And also, if individuals have concern, as George had mentioned, there's blood testing that can be provided. So as I mentioned, the developing fetus and young children are particularly vulnerable because their brains are still developing. In adults, again, there's evidence that chronic exposure is associated with health outcomes affecting neurology, cardiovascular systems, kidney disease, and reproductive disorders. But again, much of these data is coming from adults exposed to chronic exposure through sustained work-related exposures. Sorry. In terms of the blood lead reference values, if someone were to have their blood tested for adults, the level that would be considered actionable would be 5 micrograms per deciliter. Good news, at this point, we have not had any concerning blood lead levels coming back from testing of students or staff at UNC. As George mentioned, the testing is free for anyone who is in an affected building. We're working on having FAQs available. We update these after we've had conversations like this, when we get questions, to try and get our answers out as quickly as possible. And, we do have several very strong and well-regarded environmental science programs at UNC. So we have resources that are available through those, as well as information from the EPA, the CDC, and the World Health Organization. I think George and I are happy to take any questions, and thank you for your attention.
So first question is, are we able to share the slides that you provided to us today? We've had a question about making sure these resources are provided widely.
Oh, yes, definitely.
All right, so we had a question in the chat. Are the family housing buildings, Beatty Hill, being tested, or were those built after 1990 and not a concern? Oh, and I see Aaron responded, Beatty Hill was built in 1991. Okay. Other questions for George and or Rebecca today?
There is one a little farther up where someone asked, is the lead problem only associated to the fixtures, or could it be a problem with deteriorating pipes that feed to the buildings?
Great question.
And I'll take a stab at that one. So it really just depends on the building. So for instance, I'll use Spencer dormitory as an example. When we found there were so many fixtures in Spencer that had evidence of some lead, that led us to think, okay, it's not just a fixture problem, it is a piping problem. And so that yielded a different investigation. In some buildings where you have multiple fixtures and maybe one comes back with lead, then that's pretty indicative that there's not an issue with the pipes. So it's kind of it's a building specific type issue. And certainly we are committed, to follow that wherever it may lead. So if it's, if there's a larger indication that it's in the pipes, we will certainly follow that, or, repairing and replacing fixtures if that's what's required.
Excellent. James had a question in the chat. Why is there only one water cooler in some buildings? These coolers are not positioned near water fountains.
Okay, so I would take it that the and I can certainly take that feedback back to our facilities group, but I would take it, in some buildings there may be other sources of potable water, so there may only be, one additional water cooler needed, but there should be an accessible water cooler in every place where we are doing that testing or where there are fountains offline. But I'll certainly, take that feedback back to facilities and maybe get some clarification around that.
Great. Keith, your hand's up.
Yes. And my question is, well, it's simply because this is not my field of expertise and I really don't know. How far back should we be concerned? Like if someone lived in these buildings, I guess more so, how often are the buildings tested for lead prior to this? How far back should someone be concerned? If someone lived in these areas or worked in these areas 3 years ago, should they be? I'm assuming like I lived in Spencer 20 years ago. I'm not dead, so I figure I'm not at risk, but how far back should people be concerned?
So I'll take the second part of that, and then I'll have that. So in terms of like the rhythm of testing, to our knowledge, the buildings have not been tested previously for this on a large scale, and unfortunately, there are no guidelines for universities or for any other areas outside of water systems, frankly, in terms of a testing regimen and how you test and the frequency you test and all of that kind of stuff. So to my knowledge, they have not been tested before. And I'll yield certainly to Dr. Fry to talk about health effects and timing and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think this, the question about concern is my response, if anyone is concerned, is the best thing to do is have a blood lead test done. Now that does highlight recent exposure. The half-life of lead in blood is about a month. So if someone had prior exposure, that wouldn't be detected now. But remembering that metals are around us all the time, all different sources. So what I would say is if anyone is concerned to take, to have their blood lead tested, would answer that question.
Great. Thank you so much to both George and to Rebecca for being with us today and answering these questions. If there are any further questions, we will be sure to forward them along. And thanks for being with us today. We are running behind on time, and I want to make sure we get to Provost Clemens because I know you have somewhere to be. Provost Clemens, thanks for being with us today and participating in our traditional roundtable. We'd love to hear from you on any updates the administration has for us, and we will be glad to pepper you with questions afterwards.
Yeah, we'll actually do mostly questions. I have very few updates. Broadly speaking, we are still working on some hiring, as you know. I'm the school government dean at this level. I'm about to charge the committee for the Keenan Flagler Business School Dean search. We're moving along in the librarian search process. So there's a number of things moving forward, fewer than before. I feel like we've accomplished some of that. Mostly my office is complete. There'll be one more announcement there in December about my vice provost position. A lot going on campus this time of year, so I'm happy to get out. I think I have events scheduled almost every night next week and some during the day. So maybe I'll run into some of you. Always happy to see people. We are working forward on the School of Data Science here and trying to figure out how to build curriculum there. There's a lot going on with the system office. You may have heard of the return on investment study that's going on. We're anxious to see some numbers there. We're not compiling the numbers. The system office has a consultant. It's the budget season. So many of you who support budget efforts will be being asked to think about your unit's budget and the budget requests. And so thank you for all your hard work on that. I think I want to, since we're running behind, rather than go down further the list, let me stop and take questions because I know people will have questions about things and I'd like to hear them.
Questions for Provost Clemens? I know this group is not silent. They're
going to be shy for a minute, and then someone's going to ask the hard question, and then everybody's going to open up.
Matt Teal.
I'll be that guy. Thanks for your time today, Provost. Going back to the F&O memo you mentioned during the previous segment about that, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that. Both from the question I had was, one, is the recent memo from F&O leadership legally valid? I raised that question with OUC and it got forwarded on. I never got an answer from OUC on that. And then two, if the memo is legally valid, is the memo also consistent with the university's policy on freedom of speech and expression and the Chicago principles that the Board of Trustees recently proclaimed to adhere to?
You're talking about the budget memo?
The F&O memo on requiring individuals, help me out, Katie.
Referring folks to media relations.
Yes, media relations, freedom of speech.
Yes.
Sorry, too many windows open.
Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer, so I can't comment on on the legal validity, I mean, I hope we're making legally valid memos. How's that? What's the
I hope
phrase?
so too.
What's the phrase in question? That one should refer to communication for some.
Let me find a link to it and I'll put it in the
Yeah.
chat. Hang on a second.
I'm happy to comment on it in broad terms, but not in legal terms. We'll have to ask a lawyer on that part. We do have them, so.
And that was the question I was referring to earlier, Provost Clemens, about that particular memo was printed and then folks were required to sign or asked to sign proving that they received it. And there was problems and issues surrounding kind of the language in it as well, around kind of vagueness and intimidation was resulted from it. So
I'm not aware of the language in it. So let me say, Keith, you were asking about the diversity survey earlier. If you have set up Outlook to sort your mail into focus and other, you know what I'm talking about? There's this attempt by Outlook to read your mail and decide what you need to see and what needs to go on the other stack. I searched on Viewfinder because I hadn't noticed that the survey had come to me, even though I reviewed it numerous times. It was in the other stack. So sometimes stuff gets put in another stack. And not all memos go by my desk before they go out, by the way. So.
Okay, thank you.
So did you find the language, Katie?
I'm attaching it in the chat. Oops, that just went to one particular person. Let's put it to everyone instead. That would be helpful.
So what I'm hearing from you, Matthew, is you asked legal specific questions about this memo.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a concern brought forward to the Personnel Issues Committee that the language was vague, perhaps intentionally so. And I'd asked University Council if they had an opportunity, if they were aware that F&O had sent this out before it went out. And then obviously OUC is busy with a lot of things right now.
Yeah.
As always.
I'm looking at it now. Since I'm not finance and operations staff, I haven't seen the memo. Let me look at it right now. Yeah, I'm not going to comment on this memo. Let me comment on a general strategy. So I think you've asked the right question. And I hope someone will get back to you. What I will do, Matthew, is I will engage. Do you know who you've been working with in legal?
I had forwarded this on. I believe Kara Simmons was the most recent person. And obviously, I think she's in DC right now.
Well, that's perfect because Kara's here in my office every Tuesday, and I'll put it on the agenda for my next meeting with her. Let me comment in general. When I was a department chair, when I was faculty, we would get not memos like this, but a kind of guideline. And this is, I think it was sent as a guideline, right? And I never know what a guideline actually means.
Well, as the policy person, I'll say we've tried to get away from guidelines for that exact reason. Guidelines are recommendations or best practices, so it's not clear even from the title if this is a requirement or a suggestion, and that's where we get into some vague interpretation.
So I would get these guidelines that said if you're a department chair and something happens, please direct media inquiries to central media. Now, I thought I knew better, and so I would sometimes speak to media anyway. Most of the times I did that, I regretted it. So I learned to just send them to the media to give the answer, because there's a context I sometimes didn't have. They were looking for a particular phrase that they would then pull out of what I said to make it into something. So from a matter of prudence, one has to be careful when speaking to the media because you don't always have the context about what they're asking for. That being said, there is no, I think it's not likely that you can be told you cannot speak to media as an individual, for instance. What you can't do is speak on behalf of the institution. And I think you understood that from the earlier thing. So I think this has to be read in that spirit. You know, there's an institutional risk if you, as an employee, speak to the media as a UNC affiliated employee about UNC, other than to give your personal opinion. So I agree with that kind of spirit of just be careful talking to the media. But again, I'm not going to comment on the specific memo because I want a chance to talk to Kara and get her expertise before I do. But thanks for bringing it to my attention.
We appreciate
Yeah,
you taking a
thank
look
you.
at it, Chris. And
Yeah.
you're right. The context is everything here. And I think that the concerns around this memo weren't per se that the memo was sent, was that the timing of it, all of the factors that went into it, like, could theoretically, without the explicit mention of you have the power and authority as an individual to speak to media,
Right.
but in these cases, we recommend that you do this.
Well, yeah, let me give you my opinion as chief academic officer. I want the world to know that we have a diversity of opinions at UNC and that we don't always agree with one another, and that we know how to interact both with one another and with the public in a civil way around disagreement. And really, I want our disagreement to be on display as part of the university, because if we can be the model for how to manage that in a kind of bad epic in our history for disagreement, I think that's what we will do for America as a university. And that's not a faculty only or student only or a staff only prerogative. That's an everybody prerogative, right? Yeah. And so you know, forget about the memo for a moment. My own personal hope for each of you is that you will feel free to politely speak your mind, defend your points of view with strong arguments, and to do that in a way that makes other people attracted to even the process of discernment itself and the arguing itself. We see all these people arguing in a way that's repulsive to us because they're immediately angry, they're immediately engaging in personal attacks or attacks on someone's community. And that's not constructive, it's not attractive, it's not persuasive. So I'm a big fan of persuasive engagement around ideas. And I would never want anybody to read a memo like this to think that they couldn't put out there, either in a letter to the editor or in a statement to the media, their own personal opinion about something that's going on, whether it be on the national, international stage, or whether it be right here in Chapel Hill. So if anybody took this to mean that they felt they were going to have their speech about those things suppressed, I apologize. That is not certainly what I intend from this desk. Though prudence sometimes I have learned the hard way, prudence is sometimes a good thing because your words don't always make it out there in their fulsome comment. They turn into a soundbite that's used to advance something you may not even have intended.
Yeah,
and I'll just jump in.
Becci?
Sorry, I just want to jump in and note that I totally hear the group and that it may have been received poorly and the timing may have made it appear to be something it's not. We provide a similar message in our division. ITS does one in their division. F&O has sent one out previously. Council has reviewed those. They are intended to ensure that we just be on the same page. They're not intended to squelch people's personal speech for all the reasons we discussed earlier. People have the opportunity to do that. My understanding is that Nate talked to you all about at VC Reps about his apology about how this could have been seen as something it wasn't intended to be, but rather a reinforcement that we do this pretty regularly in many places. I can go back to him as well and affirm that you all raised this again, but and also acknowledge that I share I share your concerns that the timing could look troubling. But I do want to, just to Chris's point and putting it in front of Kara, we did ask Charles and his team to weigh in on these after the last meeting, just to make sure that we were still on the same page. We had gone before previously and had them review them. And our team usually sends ours out a little earlier in the year. I don't know what the reasoning for Nate's timing was. I know he talked to you all at VC Reps. I wasn't at that meeting, but I'm certainly happy to circle back to him as well.
That's great context to know, Becci, that this has been taken to OUC, and that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think you know the intent in that context here is to have kind of single points of contact on finance matters so that people get one message from more than it is to talk about other issues that you may be asked about.
Stacy, your hand's up.
So I'm sure that you can only say limited things, I guess, but I was curious with the Supreme Court case, depending obviously on, on how that goes, do we have, I guess, committees or anybody in place looking at how to navigate the, potential issues that may arise from, obviously a negative decision?
Yes, thanks, Stacy. That's a great question. You're right. I can only say limited things. We have been discussing all possible outcomes as a leadership team led by Kevin and with input from everyone, especially with input from admission. We have a really good modeling team. In order to get as far as we are, we've had to game out all kinds of different scenarios using Monte Carlo simulations and other things. And so we have the basic tools we need to go forward no matter what happens. We've talked about different strategies, but of course, we'd like to discuss those strategies publicly, and we can't do that while the trials, while the case is open, because we can affect it. So the answer is, yes, there's been a lot of discussion. I have a lot of confidence in this team. No one's values are going to change on this campus as a result of anything that happens in a court case. And we have, I think, always found ways to express our collective values and try to turn them into the outcomes that we hope for. And I think we'll continue to do that as a community, no matter what happens. And in fact, it's a good chance not to get too caught up on that, because we have a lot of smart people and a lot of flexibility. And I'll just put in a plug for pipeline efforts. I know many of you work with high school students. We have a lot of presence in high school campuses with our advising corps and other folks who go out. There's a lot of work to do. One of the answers we give when people say, why is Carolina 60% women and 40% men? And one of the interesting answers is that's our applicant pool. That reflects the people who are applying to UNC. Well, if the applicant pool changes, and obviously it does, who's here, then we need to work earlier on who believes they can belong at Carolina and get folks to apply so that we have a strong applicant pool that's reflective of the state. And so I think a lot of our work may focus on moving into the encouragement and support for people who want to come here. And you can do an infinite number of things there. So I think we have a lot of latitude. We have a lot of things we can do. There's, in a way, we need to be thinking about that anyway. So this is a good chance for us to assess it. So thank you for your question. It is a topic in almost every senior meeting, as you might guess.
Well, Provost Clemens, I know you have somewhere to be at 10:30, so we appreciate you being with us and answering our questions today.
Yeah, and I thank you. I wish I had been ready for the one on the memo.
Oh, no worries, no worries. We appreciate.
I missed the memo on the memo, but no, thank you. Let me just say thank you, Katie, for your hard work, for everyone's, for all of our staff and everyone who supports this university, and for all you do. I feel honored to be a part of this institution, and I'm really grateful for your work and your engagement.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, we have our traditional human resources update. Becci, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see all of you again. Happy November. I cannot believe that there's Christmas countdowns already. That seems totally impossible. I want to share in Chris's gratitude for all of you. I hope many of you were able to get out and celebrate at Employee Appreciation and have the car window shields to prove it, as well as commentary and feedback on the preferred barbecue lunch, which I understand some were highly disappointed in the fact that we moved away from the bowls, and others were thrilled that their survey results got them the barbecued lunch they wanted. We're hopeful that we can do more of that in the future. We just wrapped up annual enrollment. 95.6% of our employees, just over 12,000 people, completed their annual enrollment on time. This is great news. That means that 95.6% of people saw 7,000 emails and 4 mailers to their homes. Sadly, 4.4% of you all did not complete it. And that for some of those folks is going to be a very expensive mistake, because the state is pretty adamant with us that we cannot make any exceptions. So if you did not do your open enrollment and you send us a message, I'm sorry to say we're going to have to send you a very disappointing message back saying that you will not be eligible to do the tobacco attestation after the fact. We wish we could make exceptions. I want to be very clear. This is not central OHR's rule, but our claims to the state are very clear in that they tell us we can't do it. So if you get any questions on your end, you might advise people accordingly. Again, I want to not focus on the 4.4, but instead on the 95.6 of you that completed it on time. Thank you very much. I hope you also noted that there were some new benefits in the mix, and that as you heard Joe talk about at a previous meeting, some better life insurance and AD&D options moving forward. So we continue to advocate for some better options ahead. There is a memo going out. You all will recall that when the state made their budget this past year, there were 3 elements of the legislative proposal that came forward related to state employees. The first was a standard across the board 3.5% increase, which was a 1% increase above and beyond what was previously budgeted. That was good news, perhaps not enough in my mind, but good news nonetheless. There were 2 other elements of that legislative document. One was what was called a labor market adjustment reserve. And this is an allocation made to each of the agencies and campuses of about 1% of the state budget or state employment or state personnel budget, budgeted employees at our campus, that we are to reallocate out to no more than 25% of our employees to address labor market issues. We are beginning the process of that. That will be completed in December. That is being managed initially centrally by looking at job classifications and where people fall under labor market and where we might be able to address that. We're also trying to move people up in labor markets and see how much impact we can make to raise salaries based on the requirements of the labor market adjustment reserve. It's fair to say that there's a lot of requirements and we have to follow all of the state rules in implementing that, which means it's a little less useful than we had hoped. I will also tell you this LMAR or LMAR, depending on how you refer to it, is also some money with strings attached. So one of the requirements is that if somebody is on partial funding, so if they receive 50% state funding and 50% other funding, whether it's trust or research or other funds, that whatever increase we give to match the labor market requirements has to have the same percentage of funding source. So if we raise the salary by $2,000, $1,000 of that would come from this labor market adjustment reserve, and then $1,000 of it would have to come from whatever that other funding source is. So if we were to spend the full allocation of our 1% based on all of the employees who might be eligible, we would be spending 2 times what we're getting to match, which is not money that the state told us we were getting. So of course, nobody had that budgeted. So we're providing some numbers out to the units to figure out what's possible, but I fully expect that is one of the challenges that we're going to face in rolling out how much of this can be used fully. We intend to use every penny that we're able to ensure that our employees are getting increases. The challenge we face, and some of you who participated in the staff assembly, particularly on the SHRA side, you saw at the most recent Board of Governors meeting, they presented some data on, I forget how they framed it as the career, or on the SHRA compensation. And they were looking at how many people were 110% of market, how many people were 100 and 110, in the range of 100 to 110% of market, how many were at 90 to 100%, and those under 90. Chapel Hill has 17.3% of our SHRA employees are already over 110% of market. Under the state rules, we're not actually even allowed to get to 110% of market when we are doing allocations. The way those people have gotten above 110% of market is by legislative increase. Increases are the only time, those legislative increases are the only time that the salaries can bump. We have 50% of our folks between 100 and 110% of market, and another 25.2 that are over 90% of market. That means the number of people who are below market or below 90% is pretty small, and that's limiting how much we can implement that LMAR. Katie raises in the chat that one of the problems is that the market data is old. She's right about that. And that is an ongoing challenge that we continue to face. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Nonetheless, we're going to use every penny we can to reinvest of that LMAR, and that guidance is coming out to HR officers and leaders. If not later this week, then first part of next week. Those adjustments will be made in the December payroll. Likewise, the other part of the legislative proposal included performance-based increases for EHRA employees. It did not include performance-based increases for SHRA employees. These are not base adjustments. They're intended to be bonuses only. And again, these are unfunded. So units will have to, if they intend to provide one-time bonuses based on performance metrics from the previous year, based on the performance review process, they will have to fund them internally. We also are making clear that those funds coming from internal need to be funds that are remaining from their budgets this year. They are not allowed to spend ahead with the expectation that in their budget asks, which are initially due middle of November, they can put in a request for new money to compensate, because there is no new money from the center to compensate. So it is internal budgets only. I fully expect that we will not see wide use therefore of the bonus provision, as folks are really cognizant of the fact that we both have limited resources and we want to manage our equity accordingly. But nonetheless, those are tools in the toolbox. Probably in better news, you've often heard me talk about, we just don't have enough tools in the toolbox to manage and how we're going to adjust. We have successfully advocated to get both retention and sign-on bonuses for SHRA employees and EHRA employees. Not surprisingly, there are some parameters around the SHRA employee one, and that was approved through OSHR and didn't require any additional governance approval. That's good news. It came first. The EHRA sign-on and retention bonuses are being modeled entirely after the SHRA structure, because we wanted to keep parity, and those are being presented to the Board of Trustees for approval at this next meeting. So we hope to be able to have the option to do sign-on and retention bonuses for both SHRA and EHRA employees using roughly the same guidance for both types of employees in the new year. So that's sort of the update that's comes from the legislative piece that follows out. I did want to talk briefly about the housekeeper stuff, and I think the provost articulated early on that there is broad support among leadership in South Building and across campus for doing more for the housekeepers on campus. I want to talk just a little bit and clarify what's going on, because there is broad support for doing something, but we have no authority to do something at this moment. So this is sort of a confluence of a number of events that has gotten really tricky. And I'm going to share with you what I know so that you understand why it is. It feels like leadership is doing nothing when in fact, we really want to do something. So as Katie noted, salary ranges have not been adjusted for a number of years. This is an ongoing challenge. The reason this has come about is because the state went ahead and moved into their career banding system a handful of years ago. The system office at the time articulated, because there were a lot of challenges with the rollout of the career banding system, that we would remain in our existing system up and until they were ready and had worked out all of the kinks in the career banding system. And so we agreed, the state agreed to have two separate parallel systems. The career banding system had a very rocky rollout. And there are still some questioning whether it's worked out as well as whether all the kinks are fully worked out. But the advantage of the career banding system is all of the other agencies were in it. And while the state has made some adjustments to their budgets over the years, they have separated the system schools. And so some state employees or other state employees have gotten increases over time, which has meant their bands have been adjusted over time. OSHR articulated that they did not intend to adjust the bands on the university side while we were in this dual system, but because they wanted to evenly crosswalk folks over. And that seemed fine initially, but has become a very big problem as the duration has extended and extended and extended. We have articulated to them, both directly from our shop, from Kevin, from me, from Link, from LaShanya, you name it, from all of you, from staff assembly and others, we have articulated the need to do this. The system office has articulated the need to make adjustments to these ranges beyond what they've done. And there's been small adjustments, but they've been very small over time. And that is has proven very problematic for all of the reasons you all know, and something you know, I hope you know, we are entirely sympathetic to. Where this has created some additional challenges is a couple of years ago in 2018, the state raised the minimum salary to $31,200. And they did so separate and apart from these agreements on ranges. So we adjusted, and many of our housekeepers did not see they saw some small bump, not a big bump. And then the crew leaders, I should say that the housekeepers got a bump, and they were bumped up right against the crew leaders. And there was a really bad compression issue. James, you raised this on a number of occasions and kept saying, when are we going to deal with the compression issue? When are we going to deal with the compression issue? As you were right to do. The problem, as you well know, is we were unable to deal with the compression issue because first we were told by OSBM we couldn't spend any money because we didn't have a state budget. Then we went into the pandemic and we were told we couldn't spend any new money. And then we were given, there was no authority to do it. So we had several periods of we had no ability to make the changes. And we kept saying, we're ready. As soon as we have the authority, we'll make the changes. That opened up earlier this year. We made adjustments for crew leaders. And those allocations were paid. At about the same time, many housekeepers, very understandably, said, why are the crew leaders getting raises and not us? We've been here all at the same time. We had to work during the pandemic. We don't get to work remotely. We should get increases too. And they're absolutely right. But those increases were not those increases to crew leaders were not made to recognize work for the pandemic or being here or not being able to go remote. Those were made entirely to address the compression that had been based on the requirement of the state previously. So where does that leave us right now? We have a range for housekeepers that has them all at the top. We have hit everybody who is a housekeeper at the top of their range, and we have no authority to move them. So, and we have housekeeper crew leaders who are not that much further above that we would like to be able to do some adjustments with. We know there is an issue here. We are keenly aware of it. But until the state gives us the authority to adjust those ranges, we cannot do so. We're earmarking resources. We're planning for that. Kevin has had calls. Randy Woodson has had calls. I've had calls. Nate's had calls. We are all advocating. I'm feeling like we're seeing a little bit of movement, but I don't have an answer yet. I can assure you we share the concern. I can also tell you that this issue is not unique to housekeepers. We're seeing it in a lot of other places on campus. And I want us to be able to address housekeepers immediately, but I also don't want this to be we're going to deal with housekeepers today, and then we're going to deal with research specialists tomorrow, and then we're going to have to, I would rather we get a solution that's more comprehensive. I'm talking to Daryl Bass at the system office on an almost daily basis to figure out how we might get there. And we are not losing sight of the fact that we've got the near-term issue of the housekeepers, but I also want to be realistic about we've got a lot of longer-term issues about a lot of other people as well. That is a long story that I don't think solves anything, but I wanted you all to have some context for that, about the fact that we all understand that the need is great. I cannot answer the question about overnight parking or parking that I know housekeepers are also raising. That is outside of my purview. Thankfully, that's somebody else's problem. I can continue to work on salary, but I can't deal with the parking. But I will tell you that we are actively working on this every single day. I think that's, the one other thing I just want to add on my list is I know that some of you may be asking what Governor Cooper's announcement was yesterday related to the new executive order on the task force on the status of higher ed governance. I don't know anything more than what was published, that Margaret Spellings and Tom Ross will be the chairs, that they intend to look at governance and how appointments are made to both the Board of Governors and the boards of trustees. But beyond that, I don't know who will be solicited as part of that. I don't know anything more, but as I do, I will most certainly let everybody in this group know that. And with that, I'll take questions.
We've got several questions on deck. Keith, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so I think Katie sort of answered it about market rates, because my initial question, and just want to double check, not saying that I don't fully trust Katie, I do, like, trust her with my life. So market rates, they're based on a statewide aggregate and not the location and the market of the institution. Is that correct? Because the reason I'm asking, the market in Cullowhee and the market in Elizabeth City is vastly different from the market of Chapel Hill, which is in Orange County and has the highest property tax rate in the state, and different from Raleigh and Charlotte.
Yes.
So it is based statewide and not where located, not based on institutional location?
That is correct, though it is based statewide. It is informed by national data. But I can tell you, you know how I mentioned that, we have 17.3% of folks above 110% and more than 50% over 100% of market. We are well above most every other campus, with the exception of the system office and NC State. So market wise, most of them are in the 3%, 2%, 4% above 110%. That means they're using less of the range because they don't need to get as high as we do. So they're intended to give us latitude. But as you know, we're always going to use the top of the range because of exactly what you talk about. But they are not based on demographics. They do not do that for EHRA folks either when they set their ranges for us. And I asked the exact same question because we're in the process of the system office has hired a consultant to do new ranges for EHRA IRIT bands, and I asked the same question. Is there any sort of ability to set these up either by institution so that State and Chapel Hill would look perhaps different than Winston-Salem State and Elizabeth City, and or by regional demographics? That's not the way they are largely set up, but they do look at both national data for the type of job and statewide data.
Thank you.
Yep.
Matt Teal. You're muted.
After all these years, you'd think I'd figure this out. Thank you, Katie, and thanks for Becci for all your overview on all the work you're doing. I really appreciate it on behalf of the Personnel Issues Committee. I'm looking back at the text of Resolution 2202, which raised the issue particularly around housekeeping, retention, morale, and resource problems. Pay was one component of what we called on the Chancellor to do, and I certainly appreciate, again, all the work there. One of the other aspects of that resolution dealt with, we called on Kevin to direct facilities, finance and operations, and HR to develop and implement a new plan by July 1 to recruit, hire, and retain permanent employees. We called on Kevin to facilitate separate small group meetings with frontline housekeeping staff and zone managers in a safe, welcoming, and non-intimidating environment. So certainly we want to appreciate the role that pay plays, but as you've noted before, pay is one small part of why people leave this institution. I think there's a larger cultural problem in housekeeping within facilities and the leadership in facilities and how they treat the housekeepers. And there are a lot of gender dynamics and language dynamics. There's a lot of issues there that go well beyond salary. So I was wondering if you could provide any updates on the other parts that don't have to do with pay in terms of, you know, I hesitate to use the term hostile work environment because that obviously has legal connotations, and I don't know that that's appropriate. But other than pay, what is being done to help facilitate a positive working environment for housekeepers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a totally fair question. I want to be clear. I'm speaking on behalf of HR.
Sure.
Housekeepers don't report to HR. This is a question that should also be directed at Nate and his team. But I'll answer the question sort of from what I know is happening. And I also want to be really clear. There are two pieces here. You did raise the question of hostile work environment. If anyone believes they're experiencing a hostile work environment, I would encourage you to be in touch either with your human resources person or go to the EOC office. If you're concerned about doing either, I want to encourage you to use the Ombuds office. And because I don't want anyone to feel as if they're in a hostile work environment. I think it's fair to say there have been some challenges among some folks in housekeeping, as there have been some challenges among other folks. I think the housekeepers have gotten a lot of additional attention, but I also don't want to discredit feelings folks are having in other places on campus. I think we have legitimate concerns about climate and culture in lots of places on campus that need addressing. And I think there are several things happening to do so. And they're never enough, and they can never only be led by administration. They also have to be led from within. In housekeeping facilities more generally, in F&O, I should say, we are working with an outside firm to look at whether our structure really is what it should look like to manage some of these pieces. We are not alone in facing some of the challenges at recruiting and retaining housekeepers, grounds, trades, folks in general. And there's a national association, and of course, I'm not going to remember the name of it, that's coming in to help us and to ask some questions like, are we managing space allocation correctly? Are we recruiting housekeepers in the right ways? Should we be looking at a different structure of where they report? How do we provide day-to-day guidance? I mean, I think there's some bigger questions happening. And that group is coming in. I believe there's some meetings scheduled later in the month with that group. Again, that's all in Nate's space, so you might follow up with him. But I do know there is some work looking at the overall structure. And this is in part as we anticipate a fulfilling Anna Wu's place. Many of you know that Anna Wu has announced her retirement. She is expected to leave in the spring. Right now, facilities and grounds roll up under Anna. And I think Nate is asking, is this the right structure, or does that need to be divided or looked at differently? And I don't think any of us have any preconceived notion about at least I don't get the sense, I don't have a preconceived notion about what the structure ought to be. But I think that's one way that we're beginning to look at this, at least from the top piece. My own team in employee and management relations is spending a lot more time with folks in facilities, having conversations about what might be useful in terms of training and development, and some of it at the employee level as well as at the supervisor level. So I know there's some things happening there. On a broader campus perspective, I have a proposal in hand to put before the strategic plan committee about putting in place a mentorship program for staff that would be inclusive of all types of employees, not just housekeepers, but certainly that would be an opportunity. I think we're also looking at things, how we might engage employee resource groups in a way that I'm concerned about childcare or elder care or third shift work, and I need some support of other people who are in the same experience, but perhaps are not in my work group, or I don't want to talk to my crew leader or my other managers, but I want some time to have a resource of folks who have shared experience. So, I mean, those are just a handful of things that I think are sort of getting at some of these issues. They're not all specific to housekeepers, but I do think those are some things that are being led sort of centrally. And I think we do need to do a little bit better job of engaging in the units about what do people want to lead within their unit. We have a lot of really good examples of what people do in other units across campus that work to foster the culture they want to see. And those are not all brought to scale, nor are they well communicated. And I think we have a good opportunity to share some of those. And perhaps that's an opportunity for us to partner with you all in bringing some of those to light.
That's great, Becky. Thank you. And I see James's hand is up, and he can speak to this with a lot more clarity and expertise than I can. I'll just follow up and say, we did submit this question to VC reps last time, and I think it was one that got bumped due to time constraints. So I do look forward to hearing from Nate on his reply to that one. And then I had one more thing I don't remember, so I'll yield my time to James.
All right.
James, your hand's up.
Hi, Becky.
Hey there.
I got a question that's not really related to, well, in a way it is related to housekeeping. I just wanted to know if you've heard anything about this, about the career banding. From my sources, from me being on Scenic and talking to some politicians, they were telling me that the system office is moving away from the new salary process because the consultant fees that were proposed was too high. And instead, they're going to stick with career banding and revise the salary levels. And
that's a totally fair question, James. And that's sort of where I was leading, where I said, I think there may be some progress, but I don't know enough yet about what the system office is. I know they've been having conversations with OSHR, and my understanding was it was required that we would roll into the state system at some point in time. It sounds like there's some conversations happening about, will that requirement remain? Because as I think it's been fair to say, we're not necessarily convinced that their structure is better than ours. In fact, I think they're probably two subpar structures, if I'm being honest. And I don't want us to move from one subpar structure to another subpar structure and have a whole bunch of people disappointed in a process. If our structure could at least have better bands that we could be clear about, and then we would have some authority over making better. What I don't know is where the authority, whether that authority is really being granted from OSHR, or if this is a sort of a suggestion that system is concerned and is explaining that to OSHR. I just don't know. And I'm waiting to get a little bit more clarity out of Daryl and team, but I think they're keeping a little bit close. I get the sense that the negotiations are ongoing, so there's a little bit that's close to the vest. And we don't get to negotiate that piece. We just get to inform that we have real concerns.
Okay, my understanding is they're going to be having a conversation on November 8th.
I knew there were things happening in November. You know more than I do. But I also will tell you, I called Daryl yesterday to get a more recent update, and he was in a dentist chair, and he said he'd call me back, but I never did get the call. So my guess is he had a swollen lip. But I was impressed that he answered the phone from the dentist chair.
All right, so I'm going to ask this difficult question. So if the lead is correct in terms of like, if we're going to stick with career banding, this is just a hypothetical because we don't know 100%, and they plan to update these ranges. What is your perspective, Becci, on how likely it is that we would get permission to do an across the board increase to say the minimum $20 an hour rate, not just for housekeepers, but for all of the folks that are around the 31.2 kind of minimum range at the moment? Do you think there's a possibility of us, when we do reevaluate the market ranges, to set that new minimum? Or is that not something that we'll have the permission or appetite to do?
It's a totally fair question and a good one. I wish I could tell you I had a good sense. What I'm really struggling with is where the authority lies, because that everything has sort of been OSHR governs SHRA employees. OSHR governs SHRA employees, and system has no authority. And where I'm really struggling with is, if system is going to pull out, does that mean we get to structure like EHRA employees and we have a little bit more autonomy as the system? Or is it we would have the ability to set our own ranges, but somebody is affirming them and we're still governed by, like, the governance isn't just about pay. It's about grievance process. It's about, there's like so many layers. And so what's hard for me to answer is the authority moving, or is just the range setting moving? And that it gets at the crux of answering the question of, if we have authority, I think it's a whole new ball game. If it's just the range setting and then everything remains the same, I don't know what level of authority we'll have. And in some places on campus, that would be good for our employees. And in other places, we have better ranges than the state. So I'm not answering your question, not because I don't want to. It's an excellent question. It's just one I haven't understood exactly how what these negotiations are set on. Is it on authority, or is it on just, we're dissatisfied with the fact that things aren't moving fast enough, so we're going to go ahead and set some ranges as a near-term solution?
Gotcha. That's helpful. Liz.
Hey there. And Becci, thank you for all your patience and all the advocacy you're able to perform at your level, which is way higher than my level.
I just wish some things were happening faster.
Right. So this is like one part question and one part statement to throw into the bucket here for context. And this is not about housekeepers. I kind of wish it was, because I really just want to boost up the housekeepers. But I'm in clinical research. So we have three kinds of studies: the kind that unfortunately our faculty need to spend monies doing. Then there's the kind that's NIH funded, where they have a ceiling on what they pay. But then there's the ones that are paid for by industry, AKA the people with tons of money that put all the commercials on TV about new drugs. Because our salaries, including the upper limit at which I am not, are public information, and they're artificially low for all the reasons we just described, I cannot bill industry sponsors in a 2022 version of what I am worth. And that's restricting monies from coming in from people who really do have the funds to pay us. And I started to wonder, what about people in other departments that similarly bill people that pay us to do things from the outside that do have lots of money? We can't accurately represent our effort. Now, of course, I can learn to prevaricate with the best of them and find other billable ways of getting these funds. But it is lying. When they ask me how much I get paid so they can do a proportion of my effort, that's public information. And it's 10 years old now? Plus, we're all a little bit under boosted in spite of all your great efforts. So, that's restricting us from getting money into the system from outside.
Yeah,
it's really outside money. What do we do about that?
it's restricting both the outside money from industry, but also the standard 3.5% that most grants build into their personnel budget. So this is something that Kevin and Randy Woodson, because certainly, and to some extent A&T, the chancellors have collectively have been articulating, because this is one of the things that sets us apart. And I mean, there are other campuses in the system as well, but certainly those three benefit from the most outside research funding and outside industry funding. We've been articulating that we're not capitalizing on the maximum resources available to us because of the way these rules apply. And that does not impact DOT or Health and Human Services in the same way. And that has been one of the compelling arguments, but I can tell you it's an ongoing conversation I'm having with Penny in the Vice Chancellor's office and Andy as well, to see if we can push in other places on that one. You're exactly right. It's crazy making, but one that is on the radar screen and something that Kevin and Randy, to really the two of them most specifically, have been trying to push in their spaces as well.
Right. And Becci, we've got Ashwini now working in the Vice Chancellor for Research's office. And what makes this hamster wheel start to feel really crazy making is when you look at the small, well, really mostly, I'm speaking, I have a very small research department. We look at all the publications about all the research money that UNC is bringing, and we're like, yeah, but it could be more. Mm-hmm. And B, I'm not like the Lineberger Center for Cancer Research. I'm ophthalmology, and we have a very small staff, as I've, banged a tea kettle about here before. But we are more adversely impacted by this limitation because we're told that our budget must only reflect monies that we have, so that my salary can't be increased or our staff can't be increased. And this impacts the amount of money we're able to bring in to justify that. So it's beyond the catch-22, but we don't have the other resources to float it out the way a larger department does.
Yeah, no,
that's just what I want to once again mention as you bring this topic up for discussion. We've got to float all boats. Thanks.
That's helpful.
Great. Matt, your hand's up.
I unmuted myself. I lower my hand. No, I remember the second thing, going back to housekeeping, Becci, and it sounds like EMR is already on this, so I may be, you might say, yeah, we're already doing that, but I did want to emphasize something that is fairly unique with the housekeepers, as I understand, is the language barrier, particularly among frontline housekeepers, and just making sure that all the great work that HR is doing at senior levels is getting literally and figuratively communicated, translated down, and shared with the housekeepers, and that's a two-way dialogue that they are able to provide, and that they're given an opportunity to provide input and feedback on what their experience is like and how you can best help them. Because I do understand, and again, others have a lot more experience with this, that there is a significant language barrier, and that a lot of the policies don't always make it down to that frontline level of the housekeeping staff, and it can create misunderstandings around what their rights are and what they're allowed to do, and then create opportunities for people to sometimes exploit those lack of understanding in ways that hopefully EMR is in there right now addressing.
Yep, we've been doing a fair amount of translation of policies and procedures. We have also spent some time directly with some of the employees, particularly those who speak Karen. There's been some preference in having some of the younger staff members who speak both English and Karen do the direct translation. The more senior employees who do not have as strong of English skills would often prefer to hear directly from members of their own community than from us. So we've been working with some of the folks in the HR team over at facilities to help coordinate, ensuring that some of those folks have time and given the latitude to speak to some members there. So it's not a one size, you must automatically translate everything. That's not proven effective. It's been a lot more getting to know the community, understanding that not all crews look the same, not all crews want the same thing. James can probably attest to this. What his crew wants and the way he communicates looks different than I know James Stamey is often on this list or on this call. His crew sometimes looks different. So I want to be careful that we're not coming up with a one size fits all option, but that in fact, all are fit into the options we do provide.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Liz, is that a leftover hand?
Yeah, sorry.
James.
I just want to tell Becci, thank you for they started the English classes back again for the Burmese.
Yes.
And that's a wonderful thing. And I hope we keep it going this time. It don't let the budget cut it out like it did before.
Yeah.
I
Same
just
here.
thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if that wasn't enough, any final questions for Becky? And Jessica, I don't know if you're on the call. It might prevail upon you to have your update get sent out via email this time, since we're super behind on time. I would appreciate it.
I'm really sorry, y'all.
No, it's not a problem, Becky. You very helpful answers to all of our pressing questions. So, hi, Jessica.
Hi, I've been here the whole time. Some really great discussions. I'm happy to send it to you via email. Please read it.
Yes, very much so. Definitely read when I send out Jessica's update, y'all, and send it out to your units as usual. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to turn to the next section of our agenda, which is technically the consent agenda. But before I move to that, small caveat, I have to head out around 11:15. So I'm going to toss it over to Keith, my trusty vice chair, to lead the rest of the meeting. But before I do so, I'm going to switch things up and move to our old business section first. And Keith, you can turn to the consent agenda after. I wanted to turn to this section first because I have one section of the wrap up from recent events, which is the Tar Heel bus tour. And I kind of wanted to provide y'all some kind of takeaways that I had from it, and share kind of my experience a little bit with y'all before I have to head off for the meeting. So I'll start off by saying it was a real bummer that it had to happen at the same time as employee appreciation, because I always love employee appreciation, especially the scavenger hunt and getting to participate. So I missed seeing you all and convening with you all on Employee Appreciation Day. But I was on a whirlwind tour of the western part of our state. A fellow West Bus alum was on the call earlier, Cameron Farwell, our new VC for communications, was on my bus. It was a fantastic experience. The biggest thing I think that I found of value was the connections with the people on the bus, and really getting to kind of interact with, communicate with, and build some camaraderie with, and mostly faculty on the bus. There was some staff, but a lot of faculty, and kind of getting to share the staff perspective on some things, and kind of especially newer faculty, which it seemed to be a lot of the folks on the bus were newer faculty to the state and to UNC in particular. It was so valuable to get to share what the Employee Forum is, what it does, and what staff bring to campus and to the state of North Carolina. So that was fantastic. I mean, every stop was great. Some highlights, the stop at the International Civil Rights Museum in Greensboro was so moving and so powerful. We got to visit NCA&T's campus, one of our HBCUs in the system. So that was fantastic to get to see that perspective. I had a Twilight Zone like moment on Thursday night of the Tar Heel bus tour. I will just share that I really had to pinch myself and tell myself this was actually happening. I got to see 3 of our Board of Trustees members enthusiastically square dance at a dinner we were having in the western part of our state. So those kinds of trippy things happened on this Tar Heel bus tour as well. So just really out of this world kind of experience. I hope that staff will continue to be a presence on these bus tours, because I think it's a super valuable opportunity. And I hope I get invited to go again on maybe the East Bus next year, because it was fantastic. So any questions from y'all on the experience? Ooh, I see my daughter helped create an exhibit for the Civil Rights Museum. Oh, that's awesome, Tracy. It was a fantastic museum for sure. Aggie Pride, that's right. Homecoming was this past weekend. And yes, I was on the bus with Dawn Osborne Adams. Dawn was actually kind of stepped into the role as our kind of facilitator because Mike Smith, who is our original facilitator, unfortunately couldn't be with us. And Dawn is a unicorn of a human being and was fantastic. So it was great to get to spend some time with her on the bus. So yeah. Awesome. Well, if y'all have any questions or want to chat about it, I'm glad to share pictures. And there is video evidence of the square dancing event. I did not participate. I sat and watched because it was late in the evening and I was not prepared for what was about to happen. So, oh goodness. You are a unicorn. Dawn is on the call. Dawn, do you want to share any thoughts with the group?
No, I think I think you did it. It really was an amazing experience. And I'll share with everybody here what I shared with the people on the bus, that part of the reason I like going on the bus tour is that I have a job that shows me all of the things that need attention and need to be fixed. And the bus tour shows me the opposite of that. It shows me the teams that are working well together, the impact of the university and the state, and just the amazing work that this university is doing around the state. And I need the balance. And I got to spend time with lots of wonderful people and have Twilight Zone moments. Like Katie and I were together during that Twilight
Yeah,
Zone.
me and Dawn were sitting next to
Yeah, just kind of looking at each other like, what is happening right now? But Katie, I think you summed it up. It really feels almost like a once in a lifetime kind of experience. And I feel very grateful to have been able to have it and to been able to pinch hit in the way that I did.
Excellent. Well, at that, I'm going to toss it over to Keith and let Keith kind of move us through the rest of the conversation, wrapping up some other recent events, and then passing our consent agenda before wrapping up. So Keith, I pass the baton to you, kind sir. Thank you for your help this afternoon or this morning. It's still morning. Oh my gosh. Bye, folks. It was good to see you.
All right. Bye, Katie. We love you.
And I love your idea in the chat, by the way.
Yes. So we're going to move through the rest of the, we'll just stick with the wrap up of recent events and then we'll circle back to the consent agenda. The forum's 30th anniversary, she does not know this, but Tiffany's going to report on that a little bit. And then University Day and our cookie giveaway, and we'll let Arlene talk about that. And then Employee Appreciation Scavenger Hunt, that would be Shane. So Tiffany, it is all yours.
Thanks, Keith. No, truly, we had an amazing time at the celebration. I think it was well attended. I think that all of the speeches that were given were awesome. A lot of great representation was present, and I hate if you guys missed out. We really did have an awesome time, and it was a great tribute to especially some of the founding members and those who kind of paved the way for the work that we do today. So it was just an exciting time for us all. Everything went great. You missed out on some really good cupcakes if you missed it. Breakfast was good. Again, just an overall great experience was had by all.
All right, thank you. Arlene, that is not true. I did not make anyone cry. I did not. So University Day, I was not a part of the ceremony and I was unable to make it to the ceremony, but I know that Shayna did. So I'll let Arlene talk about our cookie giveaway, and if Shayna has any highlights or anything she wants to talk about from University Day, we'll go with that, and then we'll just go right into Shane and the scavenger hunt and employee appreciation.
We got really lucky with the weather. It was warm, but there was a few sprinkles, but rain never actually came down, and we were very popular. Some staff came out, specifically people who were lining up for University Day were very happy to have cookies. We grabbed a few students who were like, oh, these are from staff? And there were cookies left over, so a lot of them went to the housekeepers with the guys who picked up the tables. And I also took some back to my department because I know people at mail services have difficulty getting away from their workspace to get cookies, so I sent some to them as well. But we were very popular. There's some really good cookies too.
Tracy, I do not know where we can find the video of University Day speeches. I'm sure they live somewhere in some space. I will try to figure that out.
I
And
saw
Matt,
a link.
Matt usually can reach out to communications and get the link. And sometimes it's keyed up to the chair speech. Speaking of, Katie was amazing. If you haven't gone to a University Day and got to see your chair represent staff, it's pretty awesome. This year was the 3rd annual Rebecca Clark Award. And what was different this year was that they actually allowed Katie to present it. So that was super cool. If you don't know the history of the Rebecca Clark Award, a resolution was passed under Charles's leadership. It took us some time to get it actually presented. I was able to do that during my time as the chair, and now Katie is actually presenting it. So it was just super cool to see. And if you haven't gone to University Day, please try to make it, and you will see that you are well supported there.
All right, Rebecca just graciously dropped the link in the chat. So there you go. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Oh, thanks, Arlene. As I speak of YouTube, Shane, would you like to take us through the scavenger hunts?
So thank you to everybody who was on the communications committee who helped with the scavenger hunt, and everybody else who helped out with it. I think it was a really big success. There were people eager at 8 a.m. to get it started. So I came into emails asking when it was going to get going. We had decent engagement. And we are going to start drawing our prizes and get back to people. But I think it was a big success. We got people on Twitter and Facebook constantly throughout the day going it. We did hybrid virtual and physical clues. And there were people pretty engaged throughout the day with the virtual ones, and then in and out with the in-person ones. So all in all, a great success. Have some ideas to make it a little more streamlined for next year, since a lot of stuff I don't think we remembered until we started running it again. But yeah, all in all, it was great. And thanks to everybody who helped out, everybody who participated too. So we got a lot of good feedback that everybody enjoyed it. So all great.
All right, thank you. Now we will circle back to the consent agenda. You all got the minutes from Matt. And so I need a motion to approve those minutes if there is not any corrections that need to be made. I'm looking at you, Arlene.
I moved to approve the minutes. I did not see any corrections that need to be made.
Can I get a second? I think Jesse just gave, Stacy just gave me a second by throwing up her hand. If we can get that recorded, it is seconded by Stacy Kiss. All right, so all those in favor, can you give me a sign?
Aye.
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 All right.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? All right, we have approved the September minutes, and for committee updates, are there any that need to be pulled out? Anyone need to report?
I was going to go through for TFAT and SFAT, the process, because I don't think it's something, the process how tuition and fees are approved at the university level, and it affects staff because it funds positions and could be in a raises where they say the department has to have money. The departments that they work in could then have money if they raise their tuitions and fees. But given the time constraints, I will defer to another time. I had a PowerPoint set up, but it's okay.
Oh, all right. Matt, if you could make note that we make sure we get that on the agenda for, would you like to do it maybe during the executive committee meeting?
Yeah, that will be fine.
Which is open to all members. So if you want to see what Tracy has to present, please join us at the next executive committee meeting. I just don't want to push the issue and make it wait an entire month. All right, so I have nothing to pull out from any of these, and I'm probably not doing this as gracefully as Katie or even in the right order. So, but we're going to push forward and it'll be done. So, so as far as committee updates and the entire consent agenda, do we have a motion?
I move.
Is one even needed? Thank you.
Arlene seconds.
All right, it is so moved. So we now have 9 minutes. And next on the agenda is new business. I have no new business to add. Does anyone else have any new business? Hearing none, we will move on. So with that, since we have sped through all of this, please make note that the next VC Reps meeting is Thursday, December the 8th. Matt will send out the survey for any questions or anything that you all want to bring up. And you all are encouraged to attend, and you can hear the responses firsthand. Since we have 8 minutes, I am going to give, and it is not enough to give justice, and I am so sorry, and we still would love to get it all in email. I'm going to ask Jessica if there are any big highlights or any really exciting things that she really wants to highlight in this space, as well as later in the email, since we did make up a little bit of time.
Hey, Keith, thank you. I'll just say that there is a lot going on mid-November, and there are already plans for December. So we did have a successful sign up for our Healthy Holiday Lunch and Learn that we'll be providing in partnership with Carolina Dining Services. All seats are full, but it will be streamed, so you can participate virtually. If you want to see a cooking demonstration, that portion will be about 30 minutes from 12 to 12:30. We also have the Maintain, Don't Gain Holiday Challenge starting November 14th to the end of the year. And that is a program, this will be their 15th year providing this by Eat Smart, Move More. Holiday Maintain, Don't Gain Holiday Challenge. It's 7 weeks, it's free, it's virtual. And it's to help you maintain your weight through the holiday season. And then do pay attention into the email that I'll send out to Katie. She'll share with you, but we also have our Work Well email coming out on Friday as well. My screen just went black. I'm not sure if you can still hear me.
Yes, we can.
So, and then if you want more details, we did close out the employee interest survey mid-October. We had 406 people participate in providing feedback on what their top health interests were. So I am reviewing those results and should be able to share them next month at the meeting or via email if interested.
I think this question, that we have a question, and the question is, I think it's based on, okay, Arlene's answered it in the text, in the chat about food drive collections, and they go to Carolina Cupboard, for those of you. Jessica, thank you. I'm sorry you didn't get your full amount of time. We do appreciate you and all that you do. For everyone on the call, I personally just want to say thank you for the part that you take in employee forum, be you a delegate or not just, because you're not just anything. You're so much more than the one thing I'm talking about, and I truly appreciate it. Or if you are a campus partner who shows up month after month, meeting after meeting, time after time, because we know that you could be anywhere else, but you chose to be here with us, and it is not unappreciated and it is not unnoticed. So we do truly appreciate you all. And for today, as my dad ends every Sunday school lesson he has ever taught in his life, I want to thank you certainly for your time and your participation. So if there is nothing else, can we get a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Motion is made
Second,
by Tracy and seconded by who?
Rebecca Howell.
Rebecca. I hereby declare this meeting adjourned. Happy Wednesday. Happy November the 2nd. And if you have not voted, you have until next Tuesday to vote. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
See y'all.